right.
And now stay tuned for another original Studio B production right here on the Voice 17104.com.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice.
Greetings, my friends. Another day, another year, another time. We're happy to be back on the air here at 17104, The Voice. And it's sort of a special month. January has a special date. The 15th of January, I think we celebrate on the 17th. We celebrate the birthday of America's best known and probably greatest African American leader, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., born in Atlanta, Georgia, but a man of the world, a man who received the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to free uh, African American people from the bondage of slavery, discrimination, and racism. Uh, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what we affectionately call a Georgia boy. He was born and raised in Georgia, the Peach State. The Peach State is where I was born. So some of these things have some very personal meaning to me. I was born in the town of Thomasville, Georgia, which is in southwestern Georgia. And Dr. King was born in Atlanta, Georgia. And his father was a pastor, I think it was Abyssinian Baptist Church. And later Martin Luther King became a pastor and he studied theology. He studied at Morehouse. He was what they call a Morehouse man. Then he left Morehouse and he studied at Crozer Theological Seminary in the city of Chester, Pennsylvania. And from there, he went to Boston University, where he got his doctorate in theology, his degree. So he was a well educated, very articulate man. And if you listen to some of his speeches, and I've been listening to those, uh, you could tell that the education uh, within the schools of Boston University, Atlanta University, Crozer University influenced this man's thinking and where he would go. When you start talking about individuals like Martin Luther, who was very white and Christian, and when you start talking about individuals like Socrates, uh, some of the Greek gods, and when he starts talking about the Romans, Pharaoh, whatever, and you know that the education that he received greatly influenced who he is and who he became to be. And let me just talk a little bit about uh, my experience. This is my show. My experience with the philosophy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And it wasn't just me, but thousands and hundreds of people were influenced by his philosophy of non-violence, passive resistance. In other words, if a man hits you on your right cheek, then you turn to him your left cheek. And you never resist. You never strike back. You never use violence in any kind of way to protect yourself. Now, this philosophy of nonviolence uh, had its effects. As a matter of fact, some things came out of the movement that was ignited and led by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. But there were other philosophies also that were not completely the same. There was a philosophy and also the law itself logically provided for you to have the right of self-defense. You don't have a right to attack someone. You don't have a right to engage in violence and war. But if someone attacks you, if someone threatens your family, threatens you, threatens your life, then you have the right to protect yourself. And this was sort of contradictory to some of the parts that Martin Luther King projected. But I dare say, possibly this philosophy could have given us some more time with this wonderful man whose philosophy was based on love and forgiveness. And there's something to be said for love and forgiveness. There's a whole lot to be said for love and forgiveness. And there was a gentleman in India by the name of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi used what was called passive resistance. But you know, while Mahatma Gandhi was using shall we say, uh, passive resistance, there were other folks who were not. And some of the same things were going on here in this country. During Martin Luther King's movement, particularly in the state of Louisiana, Jonesboro, uh, the Ku Klux Klan, who was dedicated to the proposition of keeping Africans in slavery. That's why they were formed. They would use murder, intimidation, and anything else they could use to bring that about. And they would kill, as a matter of fact, a deputy sheriff, African American, one of the first deputy sheriffs in this county, was killed and murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. But in the state of Louisiana, you had some veterans of foreign wars, African American veterans who had been trained in the art of war. And their philosophy was that they would protect their families. They would protect the lives of their people. Now, today we are actually a little ahead of ourselves, but we are celebrating the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We will celebrate him, and we will discuss his philosophy, present his philosophy. We have a video that shows a number of people presenting portions of his speech, and we will also present a small video of an organization known as the Deacons for Defense and Justice. The Deacons for Defense and Justice simply means that they will not allow anyone, whether it's the Klan, whether it's local law enforcement, state law enforcement, anyone to come in and attack and bring down our community without fighting back. Now, we've had a number of incidents, like in Rosemont, Florida, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where other individuals have moved into our community, destroyed it, killed our women, killed our children, murdered hundreds and hundreds of people, and we were not prepared to defend ourselves. So that happened in this country. And we had a man by the name of J. Edgar Hoover who defended the right of Klansmen, of racists, to kill and destroy Black folks, and did everything he could, including the murder of Fred Hampton and others, to try to stop us from getting our freedom. And we had a tale of two governments. We had a president that organized the Great Society to help bring us up from the poor, who signed into law the Civil Rights Law of 1964, pushed for it. His name was Lyndon Johnson, who was a Southerner, by the way. And on the other hand, we had J. Edgar Hoover having surveillance, killing, and doing things to help to stop. And he felt the greatest enemy to our country was the freedom fighters who were trying to change things on behalf of other Americans who were dedicated patriots, Americans who fought for this country, lost their lives for this country by thousands. They fought in World War II, they fought in Korea, they fought in the Civil War to protect our country. And he considered them his enemy or the country's enemy simply because they defended themselves and they wanted freedom. we had to deal with this in this country. We're still dealing with it to a certain degree. The beauty about the United States is that we do have a democracy. And it's so critically important that we preserve and we keep that democracy in place so that people, no matter what their color are, have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to fight for equality and justice and to respect other people. Now, we are going to get right into it and show these films. The first thing I want to do is introduce you to a little small video on the Deacons for Defense and Justice, and I'll have some comments after that. And then we'll move to our next video, which tells you a story about one of the greatest Americans that have ever lived, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We'll first start with the Deacons for Defense and Justice.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Joseph Ward, your historical homeboy, right here on the On the Shoulders of Giants YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in, for checking me out and being a part of this journey. We're here to give you the sung and unsung heroes of the African diaspora that you probably wouldn't learn about. So thank you for rocking with us. And I just want to let you know that we're now on Patreon. So you can become a patron and help us empower and educate as many communities as possible throughout the African diaspora. www.patreon.com/OTSOG. Now go ahead and get to this video so we can drop this knowledge on you. Peace out. Always. The Deacons for Defense and Justice. In 1964, the Deacons for Defense and Justice were formed by black men in Jonesboro, Louisiana, to protect the black citizens and civil rights activists from the Ku Klux Klan. Armed self-defense was inconsistent with the nonviolent philosophy adopted during the civil rights movement. Two military veterans named Ernest Chilly Willie Thomas and Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick were the original founders of the Deacons for Defense. The organization grew in popularity because it appealed to sections of the civil rights movement who no longer believed that nonviolence was a sound strategy. Thomas and Douglass created an organization that would discourage Klan attacks as well as help prevent activists and black community members from police and fire hose attacks. The Deacons made headlines when their defense activities forced then Louisiana Governor John McKeithen and Jonesboro city leaders to compromise with civil rights activists. As the Deacons grew in numbers and popularity, they began to open chapters in different cities. In 1965, Thomas and Kirkpatrick established a second chapter of the Deacons for Defense and Justice in Bogalusa, Louisiana. After working with the black leaders in Bogalusa, Thomas and Kirkpatrick left the chapter under the leadership of Robert Bob Hicks, Charles Sims, and A.Z. Young. The Klan was attacking the blacks in Bogalusa, so the people organized to defend themselves. The first black deputy sheriff of Washington Parish, Louisiana, was assassinated by racist whites. The murder increased the tension between the Klan and the Deacons. The tension grew so tough that federally regulated Reconstruction era laws were instituted to protect the civil rights activists. In 1966, civil rights activist James Meredith was embarking on a march from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi called the March Against Fear. Meredith was shot and severely wounded by a white supremacist. Stokely Carmichael and many other activists completed the march for Meredith, but the idea of self-defense was more prominent. Carmichael was instrumental in convincing Dr. Martin Luther King and other leaders that the Deacons can be integrated into the movement, provide protection, and maintain the unity of the movement. By 1965, the Deacons were being investigated by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. COINTELPRO tactics were unleashed upon the Deacons, and the FBI was able to obtain substantial information about the organization. Disloyal black FBI informants were feeding the FBI information about the activities the Deacons engaged in. These tactics helped members of the Deacons become continuously harassed, arrested, and questioned by the FBI. As the years passed, other organizations emerged and began to overshadow the Deacons as far as public attention. The presence of the Black Panthers took away much of the FBI attention that was usually reserved for the Deacons. By 1968, the Deacons disbanded, but in their short time, they made a huge impact. The Deacons helped change the ideas and strategies of the civil rights organizations and helped lay the foundation for organizations such as the Black Panther Party to exist. They understood that nonviolence was a tactic that can be used, but nonviolence was not always the best course of action. They often challenged the KKK and Louisiana police who were looking to harm Black people. In all, the Deacons were able to organize 21 chapters and 46 affiliate chapters across the country. Historian Lance Hill wrote the following about the Deacons. The hard truth is that these organizations produced few victories in their local projects in the Deep South. If success is measured by the ability to force changes in local government policy and create self-governing and sustainable local organizations that could survive when the national organizations departed, the Deacons' campaign frequently resulted in substantial and unprecedented victories at the local level, producing real power and self-sustaining organizations. The Deacons were not fully accepted when they were created, but over time it was understood that they were not organized to incite violence, but only to protect their people from white supremacists. To the entire Deacons for Defense and Justice, we proudly stand on your shoulders. For more information, please visit www.ontheshoulders1.com or www.ontheshoulders.org.
The Deacons for Defense and Justice, they say from 24 to 50 chapters were established throughout this country. One such place where they established an organization that was quite similar to the Deacons was in Chambersburg, Maryland. Uh, uh, they had a situation where they were under attack by white extremists, so they did the same thing. Fortunately, they didn't have any real battles, because once the extremists understood that these folks would fight to protect themselves, then they would stop their attacks, and they would go use some other kind of philosophy. Uh, Let me just mention to you again, and most of you who listen to my show on a regular basis knows that I grew up in the small town of Chester, Pennsylvania. Chester, Pennsylvania is south of Philadelphia, right next to Claymont, Delaware, the home of the President of the United States, and where he currently lives, as a matter of fact. Well, Chester was an extremely segregated place back in those days. African Americans were in the minority and experienced racism and discrimination in terms of segregated schools, in terms of employment, and every other kind of way. And so we developed a movement, organized first under the banner of the NAACP. George Raymond was the president of the NAACP, and Mr. Lewis Brown Sr. was the vice president of the NAACP. So we set up a movement, and we also set up here a new organization that was led by a man by the name of Stanley Branch. It was called the Committee for Freedom Now. And I worked with the NAACP, and I worked with the Committee for Freedom Now as a community organizer. And we marched, we set up demonstrations, we went through a whole litany of negotiation, that kind of thing, to try to bring about change. But ultimately, we've had hundreds of people, sometime over 1,000 people, marching in the streets of Chester. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on a walking, keep on a talking, marching up the freedom's highway. So we sing, we march, we pray, and as a result of that, we were physically attacked by the local police. I received a damaged skull. I was beaten in the streets of Chester, for peacefully protesting, marching. So they began, and they also brought in, and the more our demonstration grew, they brought in Pennsylvania state troopers in, who began to do the same thing. So as a result of that, some of our folks armed themselves. The Panthers used to say, arm yourself or you'll harm yourself. So we many of us armed ourselves. Now, there was a time when the so-called leaders of our organization, the majority of them who were leading the marches, were in prison. Gloria Richardson, that came down from Maryland to work with us, and she went to jail with us. And with all of the leaders in jail, in fact, I was in jail, but then my father got me out. And so the leadership of the organization was placed in my hands. So I had to make a determination as to whether we should march or not march. Now, we knew that hundreds of state police officers, armed to the teeth, were ready to shatter, kill, destroy people who were involved in the march. And quite honestly, some of our people were prepared to face that. And they were ready to face that. So we had to make a decision. I had to make a decision in concert with those people who were there as to whether or not we would go ahead and march, risk the possibility of lives being lost, and people being beaten in jail, children, what have you, or maybe cancel that day's march in terms of negotiation and see if we can get a negotiated settlement at that time. So I made a decision to cancel at that point and try to use some other kind of way of getting it done. And now most folks agree with me. Most folks went along with it, but then we had a few people who felt that that was a bad decision. But at any rate, one thing that we did believe, somewhat similar to the deacons, that we believe that in nonviolence. First of all, we believe in nonviolence and not to peacefully march and to not attack anyone, but nonviolence, but preserve the legal right for self-protection. And as a result of that, and that decision, look at it, we thought at that particular time it was a good idea to cancel the march and to do some other things. And we continued to demonstrate. Other folks got out of jail, and we continued to protest and do that kind of thing. And eventually, Bill Scranton was elected governor. And Bill Scranton was more of a liberal Republican who believed in equality. And so he sent a commission of human relations people into Chester to investigate Chester to see if discrimination took place. And his commission found the local authorities as being guilty of racism and discrimination. And to the governor's credit and to Bill Scranton's credit, they began to set up terms in order to bring about change. Bill Scranton was a good man, and Bill Scranton took care of those issues. So our decision not to march that night paid rich dividends. Now let's move over. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Well, I guess be in his 90s if he was alive today, but he's not alive today. Unfortunately, in 1968, he was assassinated by some of these same right-wing individuals. And some people think the government might have been involved in the killing of Martin Luther King, the killing of Malcolm X, the killing of JFK. You think that's a possibility, but we really, really don't know. But at any rate, we want to take a look at America's greatest patriot and the cause for eradicating discrimination and inequality. So we're going to listen to some individuals reading some portions of the speech of Dr. Martin Luther King.
And I would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from the dark dungeons of Egypt through, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness on toward the Promised Land. And in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there.
I would move on by grace and take my mind to Mount Olympus. And I would see Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Euripides, and Aristophanes assembled around the Parthenon. And I would watch them around the Parthenon as they discussed the great and eternal issues of reality. But I wouldn't stop there.
I would go on, even to the great heyday of the Roman Empire, and I would see developments around there through various emperors and leaders. But I wouldn't stop there.
I would even come up to the day of the Renaissance and get a quick picture of all that the Renaissance did for the cultural and aesthetic life of man. But I wouldn't stop there.
I would even go by the way that the man for who I am named had his habitat. And I would see Martin Luther as he tacked his 95 Theses on the door at the Church of Wittenberg. But I wouldn't stop there.
I would come on up even to 1863 and watch a vacillating president by the name of Abraham Lincoln finally come to the conclusion that he had to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. But I wouldn't stop there.
I would even come up to the early 30s and see a man grappling with the problems of the bankruptcy of his nation and come with an eloquent cry that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. But I wouldn't stop there.
Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy.
Now that's a strange statement to make, because the world is so messed up. The nation is sick, trouble is in the land, confusion all around. That's a strange statement, but I know somehow that only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way are responding.
Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up. And wherever they are assembled today, whether they are in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Accra, Ghana, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same. We want to be free.
Another reason that I'm happy to live in this period is that we've been forced to a point where we are going to have to grapple with the problems that men have been trying to grapple with through history. But the demands didn't force them to do it. Survival demands that we grapple with them. Men, for years now, have been talking about war and peace. But now, no longer can they just talk about it. It is no longer a choice between violence and non-violence in this world. It's non-violence or non-existence. That is where we are today.
Also in the human rights revolution, if something isn't done, and done in a hurry, to bring the colored peoples of the world
out of their long years of poverty, their long years of hurt and neglect, the whole world is doomed.
Now I'm just happy that God has allowed me to live in this period to see what is unfolding. Yeah. And I'm happy that He allowed me to be in Memphis.
I can remember when Negroes were just going around, as Ralph has said so often, scratching where they didn't itch and laughing when they were not tickled. But that day is all over. We mean business now, and we're determined to gain a rightful place in God's world.
That's all this whole thing is about. We aren't engaged in any negative protest and in any negative arguments with anybody. We are saying that we are determined to be men. We are determined to be people. We are saying that we are God's children. That we are God's children. We don't have to live like we are forced to live.
Now, what does all of this mean in this great period of history? It means that we've got to stay together. We've got to stay together and maintain unity. You know, whenever Pharaoh wanted to prolong the period of slavery in Egypt, he had a favorite formula for doing it. What was that? Some may ask. He kept the slaves fighting amongst themselves. But whenever the slaves get together, something happens in Pharaoh's court and he cannot hold the slaves in slavery. When the slaves get together, that's the beginning of getting out of slavery. Now let us maintain unity.
Secondly, let us keep the issues where they are. The issue is injustice. The issue is a refusal of Memphis to be fair and honest in its dealings with its public servants, who happen to be sanitation workers. Now, we've got to keep attention on that. That's always the problem with a little violence. You know what happened the other day? And the press dealt only with the window breaking. I read the articles. They very seldom got around to mentioning the fact that 1,300 sanitation workers are on strike, and that Memphis is not being fair to them, and that Mayor Loeb is in dire need of a doctor. They didn't get around to that.
Now we're gonna march again. And we've got to march again in order to put the issue where it is supposed to be and force everybody to see that there are 1,300 of God's children here suffering, sometimes going hungry, going through deep, dark, and dreary nights, wondering how this thing is going to come out. That is the issue. And we've got to say to the nation, we know how it's coming out. For when people get caught up with that which is right, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory.
We aren't going to let any mace stop us. We are masters in our non-violent movement, in disarming police forces. They don't know what to do. I've seen them so often. I remember in Birmingham, Alabama, when we were in that majestic struggle there, we would move out of the 16th Street Baptist Church day after day. By the hundreds we would move out. And Bull Connor would tell them to send the dogs forth, and they did come. But we just went before the dogs singing.
Ain't nobody gonna turn me around. Bull Connor next would say, turn the fire hoses on. And as I said to you the other night, Bull Connor didn't know history. He knew a kind of physics that somehow didn't relate to the trans physics that we knew about. And that was the fact that there was a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. And we went before the fire hoses. We had known water. If we were Baptist or some other denomination, we had been immersed. If we were Methodist and some others, we had been sprinkled. But we knew water. That couldn't stop us.
We just went on before the dogs, and we would look at them. And we'd go on before the water hoses, and we would look at it. And we'd just go on singing.
Over my head, I see freedom in the air.
Then we'd be thrown in the paddy wagons, and sometimes we were stacked in there like sardines in a can. They would just throw us in, and old Bull would say, take them off. And they did. We would just go on in the paddy wagon singing.
We shall overcome.
And every now and then, we'd get in jail. And we'd see the jailers looking through the windows, being moved by our prayers. and be moved by our words and our songs. And there was a power there which Bull Connor couldn't adjust to. So we ended up transforming Bull into a steer, and we won our fight in Birmingham. Now, we've got to go on in Memphis just like that. I call upon you to be with us when we go out Monday.
Now about injunctions. We have an injunction and we're going to court tomorrow morning to fight this illegal, unconstitutional injunction. All we say to America is, be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or in any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. We are going on.
We need all of you. And you know what's beautiful to me is to see all of these ministers of the gospel. It's a marvelous picture. Who is it that is supposed to articulate the longings and aspirations of the people more than the preacher? Somehow the preacher must have a kind of fire shut up in his bones, and whenever injustice is around, he must tell it. Somehow the preacher must be an Amos, and saith, when God speaks, who can but prophesy? Again with Amos, let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. And somehow the preacher must say with Jesus, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me, and he hath anointed me to deal with the problems of the poor.
I want to commend the preachers. Under the leadership of these noble men, James Lawson, one who has been in this struggle for many years, he's been to jail for struggling. He's been kicked out of Vanderbilt University for this struggle, but he's still going on fighting for the rights of his people. Reverend Ralph Jackson, Billy Kyles, I could just go and write down the list, but time will not permit. But I want to thank all of them. I want you to thank them, because so often preachers aren't concerned about anything but themselves, and I'm always happy to see a relevant ministry.
It's all right to talk about long white robes over yonder and all of its symbolism, but ultimately, people want some suits and dresses and shoes to wear down here. It's all right to talk about streets flowing with milk and honey, but God has commanded us to be concerned about the slums down here and his children who can't eat 3 square meals a day. It's all right to talk about the New Jerusalem, but one day, God's preacher must talk about the new New York, the new Atlanta, the new Philadelphia, the new Los Angeles, the new Memphis, Tennessee. This is what we have to do.
Now, the other thing we'll have to do is this. Always anchor our external, direct action with the power of economic withdrawal. Now, we're a poor people. Individually, we're poor when you compare us to white society in America. We're poor. Never stop and forget that collectively, that means all of us together, collectively we are richer than all the nations in the world, with the exception of 9. Did you ever think about that? After you leave the United States, Soviet Russia, Great Britain, West Germany, France, and I can name the others, the American Negro collectively is richer than most nations of the world. We have an annual income of more than $30 billion a year, which is more than all the exports in the United States, and more than the national budget of Canada. Did you know that? That's power right there, if we know how to pool it.
We don't have to argue with anybody. We don't have to curse and go around acting bad with our words. We don't need any bricks and bottles. We don't need any Molotov cocktails. We just have to go around to these stores and these massive industries in our country and say, God sent us here to say to you that you are not treating the children right. And we have come by here to ask you to make the first item in your agenda fair treatment where God's children are concerned. Now, if you're not prepared to do that, we do have an agenda we must follow. And our agenda calls for withdrawing economic support from you.
So, as a result of this, we are asking you tonight to go out and tell your neighbors not to buy Coca-Cola in Memphis. Go by and tell them not to buy Sealtest milk. Tell them not to buy, what is the other bread? Wonder Bread. And what is the other bread company, Jesse? Tell them not to buy Heart's Bread. As Jesse Jackson has said, up to now, only the garbage men have been feeling the pain. Now, we must kind of redistribute the pain. We are choosing these companies because they haven't been fair in their hiring policies. And we are choosing them because they can begin the process of saying they are going to support the needs and the rights of these men who are on strike. And then they can move on downtown to Mayor Loeb's office and tell him to do what is right.
But not only that, we have got to strengthen the black institutions. I call upon you to take your money out of the banks downtown and deposit your money in the Tri-State Bank. We want to have a bank-in movement in Memphis. Go by the Savings and Loan Association. We are not asking you something that we do not do ourselves at SCLC. Judge Hooks and others will tell you that we have an account here in the Savings and Loan Association from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We're telling you to follow what we are doing. Put your money there. You have 6 or 7 black insurance companies here in the city of Memphis. Take out your insurance there. You want to have an insurance in.
Now these are some practical things that we can do. We begin the process of building a greater economic base, and at the same time, we are putting pressure where it really hurts. I ask you to follow through here.
Now, let me say as I move to my conclusion that we've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end.
Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through. And when we have our march, you need to be there. If it means leaving work, if it means leaving school, be there. Be concerned about your brother. You may not be on strike, but either we go up together or we go down together.
Let us develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. One day, a man came to Jesus and he raised some questions about some vital matters of life. At points, he wanted to trick Jesus and show that he knew a little bit more than Jesus knew and threw him off base. Now that question could have easily ended up into a philosophical and a seriological debate. However, Jesus immediately pulled that question from midair and placed it on a dangerous curve between Jerusalem and Jericho.
He talked about a certain man who fell among thieves. You remember that a Levite and a priest passed by on the other side. They didn't stop to help him. Finally, a man of another race came by. He got down from his beast, decided not to be compassionate by proxy, but he got down with him, administered first aid, and helped the man in need. Jesus ended by saying, "This was the good man. This was the great man," because he had the capacity to project the I into the thou and to be concerned about his brother.
Yes.
Now, we use our imagination a great deal to try to determine why the priest and the Levite didn't stop. At times, we'd say they were busy going to a church meeting, an ecclesiastical gathering, and that they had to get on down to Jerusalem so they wouldn't be late for their meeting.
At other times, we would speculate that there was a religious law that one who was engaged in religious ceremonials was not to touch a human body 24 hours before the ceremony. And every now and then, we begin to wonder whether maybe they were not going down to Jerusalem or down to Jericho, rather to organize a Jericho Road Improvement Association. That's a possibility. Maybe they felt that it was better to deal with the problem from the causal root, rather than to get bogged down with an individual effect.
But I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me. It's possible that those men were afraid. You see, the Jericho Road is a dangerous road. I remember when Mrs. King and I were first in Jerusalem. We rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as we got on that road, I said to my wife, I can see why Jesus used this as the setting for his parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's really conducive for ambushing.
You start out in Jerusalem, which is about 1,200 miles, or rather 1,200 feet above sea level. And by the time you get down to Jericho, 15 or 20 minutes later, you are about 2,200 feet below sea level. That's a dangerous road. In the days of Jesus, it came to be known as the Bloody Pass.
It's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible they felt the man on the ground was merely faking, and he was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize them over there, lure them there for quick and easy seizure.
And so the first question the priest asked, the first question the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him?
That's the question before you tonight. Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to my job? Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to all of the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor. The question is not, if I stop to help this man in need, what would happen to me? The question is, if I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? That's the question.
Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation, and I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you.
Several years ago I was in New York City, autographing the first book that I had written. While sitting there autographing books, a demented black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing and I said, "Yes." The next minute, I felt something beating on my chest.
Before I knew it, I'd been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. That blade had gone through. And the x-rays revealed that the tip of that blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. Once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood, and that's the end of you.
It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital.
They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I'd forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said.
But there was another letter from a little girl, a young girl who was a student at the White Plains High School. I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it.
It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at White Plains High School." She said, while it shouldn't matter, I would like to mention that I am a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering, and that if you would have sneezed, you would have died. I am simply writing to say I'm so happy you didn't sneeze.
I want to say tonight that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around in 1960 when students all over the South started to sit in at lunch counters. I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel.
If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here around in 1962 when Negroes from Albany, Georgia decided to strengthen their backs up. And whenever men and women strengthen their backs up, they're going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent.
If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963. The black people of Birmingham, Alabama aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to...
Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming down to the end of the show. That was a tremendous speech. I've been to the mountaintop. Was the final speech of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We don't have quite enough time to share the very end, but he said that he had been to the mountaintop and that he looked over the River Jordan and he had seen the promised land. And he said that I may not be there or get there with you, the promised land, but we as a people will arrive at the promised land. That's what he said. We're talking about one of America's greatest individuals, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who has a monument near the Washington Monument in the city of D.C., something that we worked for and fought for a very, very long time. But in spite of the monument, in spite of the other things, but he's in our hearts. The man's most powerful message was a message of love and kindness and goodwill, and a message of bringing people together, bringing African Americans together, but bringing people of all ethnicities together, because we're all God's children, whether we be white, black, Indian, Chinese, or Asian, and we have no right to misrepresent what God has told us to do, and that's to love all people. Live by the three: faith, hope, and charity. But the greatest of these is charity, which is love. Let me just say this really briefly as we end our show. We encourage you to come down to Lebanon Valley Farmers Market at 35 South 8th Street in the city of Lebanon. We got some wonderful things down there. My business is African Paradise. I need your help. I need your support because without your support, there is no African Paradise. But we have things that we show every week. Take a look at this picture here. We have giraffes that are 4 or 5 feet tall. We have African clothing. We have original oil paintings from Guinea-Bissau. We have jewelry from Senegal. We have oils from India. We have clothing from India. We have a lot of things, and we do know, and I kid you not, we do need your support. It is a very difficult situation there, and in spite of the gorgeous and beautiful art that we display, sometimes we have individuals that passes by and don't even stop to take a look. So we want you to not only stop to take a look, but to buy. And we appreciate visitors. We appreciate anyone that comes and visits us and joins us. I was wonderfully blessed to have the Gadsons that came by the other day and to give us the kind of support that we need. We love Gadsons. They've done a wonderful job for this community, and we appreciate them and Western African Set Paradise. So I'll say to you all, God bless you, and I want to thank the Thomases for the work that they're doing in 17104. This is vital. I don't know if you people realize just how important this station is to not only the African American community, but the broader community. A worldwide broadcast that's sending a message throughout the world. Continue to join us. Continue to support us. And we'll see you next week. This is Richard James of African Paradise and of the Richard James Show. So peace and goodwill. Love to you all. God bless, and I'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. We thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let's hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.